My son used to be outgoing and he loved people and he loved to go places. Despite his disabilities, he still led a very, very active life. People are so quick to just dismiss special needs. They don't have a voice. They don't have an advocate to say, no, this is the medication, because most of them are nonverbal. And the parents, they have to go along with the doctors. I had done a little research and I learned about Tegretol, and I saw an obscure article saying that, Tegretol could cause facial movements. And I brought it up to his neurologist. He said, oh no. I remember the appointment vividly because a female doctor walked in. Literally the first words out of her mouth was, it's not the medication. I just knew it was like, something's off. The drug commercials say that these medications cause movement disorders. There's no way. Just complete denial. I mean, it wasn't like the possibility, it was complete denial. They tried to say that it's make-believe in your head. Why are you walking into the room and, pro-pharma? I mean, why? I waited too long, honestly. I left my son on the medication and it just caused further harm. He was having all of the symptoms of serotonin syndrome. I mean, I saw psychosis, I saw dilated pupils, diarrhea, body movements. When you reach that peak of serotonin syndrome, it can be deadly. His eyes will do the craziest things, and to this day he still suffers from the eye dystonia. It's horrifying to watch what my son went through. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Hi everybody, welcome to RX Build. This is a channel that is dedicated to discussing the very real dangers that revolve around the pharmaceutical approach of medicine. In these sections, we interview those who have been harmed by these chemicals or their loved ones and have found the courage to come up here and share their truth with you. So you guys are aware and know that these things are out there, they're happening, and they're not rare. It's not 1 in a million. So here with me now, I have Shannon. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us and coming to this channel to speak up.
No, thank you for having me. I'm here because I have a 23-year-old son with cerebral palsy and autism and epilepsy. So he kind of multifaceted, very varying degrees. So we've always dealt with a lot with him, so we're just accustomed to the medical world, I guess. About 3 years ago, he started having some behaviors that we couldn't put our finger on. We just couldn't figure it out. And so I reached out to a neurologist, and we did a 3-day EEG, and it ruled out that it was not, the body movement that he was doing was not seizure activity. So that was completely ruled out. And so you don't get an answer, and it's like, okay, well, now what? I was concerned that he was on Tegretol for seizures. He's been on Tegretol for a long time. And I was personally concerned that the movement I was seeing was seizure activity, and that maybe the Tegretol had reached its fruition, and we needed to change medications. And so I reached out. That's when I scheduled the appointment and started trying to advocate, well, what is this? And so that's when we did the EEG. And he was having the movement. It was not associated with seizures.
They ruled that out without a doubt with using the EEG and seeing the movement itself is not corresponding to seizure activity in the brain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So seizures were ruled out. So what you see in those videos is not seizure activity.
You shared with me some videos that are actually depicting what your son is dealing with right now. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's first of all a very hard watch. My heart goes out to you and your family. And thank you for sharing that. From what I see, okay, from my limited knowledge in the medical field, does not seem like classic symptoms that I've seen or studied from someone has, for example, cerebral palsy or some form of seizure. It didn't look like something of a sort. And I'm sure that you, as you said, your son has been dealing with seizures.
They've been under control for a long time. He has seizure activity.
Okay. You were kind of already intuitive, developed an intuitive sense to that. You kind of recognize when something like that is happening. I mean, it is your son. You're with him for these 20-something years. And this seemed different, right? This seemed something strange, something completely normal.
When you hear the drug commercials say that this medication may cause movement disorders that may be permanent, most likely the movement disorders are going to be permanent. And with dystonia, from what I've learned online and stuff, is that it starts in a general area and then it progresses. It starts like in a focal, like a certain area, and then it spreads, and that's what's happened with my son. We let it go on too long. So
how many years was he on these medications, first of all, and what specific medications do you suspect were behind this?
So he's on Carbamazepine, which is Tegretol, and then amitriptyline, which is a first generation tricyclic. I really had to just delve into, I guess I'll get to that later, about just researching all the 2 medications and, how they factor into dystonia. It's out there. You just have to dig and research it. I started to join online forums, and my son, he's limited, about 20 words. I can't get feedback from him because he's limited vocabulary. So I had to reach out to other adults that are going through this, and I had to ask questions and, just research and try to put the puzzle pieces together, because I wasn't getting, and I still haven't got the answers from the medical community. It's like, we still do not have a specific diagnosis of dystonia. And I've seen 5 neurologists since the beginning of this. After the initial EEG came back, and that was with his primary neurologist, we went and saw an autism neurologist, and he pretty much, was like, okay, well, I don't know. Okay. And you're like, well, thanks for trying, I personally had to keep pushing. I was like, well, I didn't even know movement neurologists existed. Nobody told me. That's something I found out from the online forums from other people. It's like, I've been around doctors for a long time with my son. I never knew that. I think my first word of advice to other people or parents or someone going through stuff, go online, talk to other people, research. There's a reason why they tell you not to go online.
Why do you think that is? That because, for example, for me, when I went to my appointment that changed the course of my life, when I was telling my physician about things that I've read online by testimonials of patients, he told me, no, do not use Dr. Google. Dr. Google is dangerous. You have to ignore that, dismiss it. It's not evidence. It's just crazy people on the internet. Why do you think they do that?
Because knowledge is power.
Because knowledge is power.
Because when you start learning and you start learning about what these medications, and there's studies, sometimes people give the doctors a free pass and they say, oh, doctors don't know. As a mother, all I have to do is spend some time on the internet, and there's medical pages written on this stuff. It's out there. The drug commercials say it in the drug commercials that these medications cause movement disorders. It's usually like at the tail end in a lowered voice.
Yeah.
It is a side effect. They put it out there.
And they don't tell you about that when you begin the treatment, do they? Usually. Or they minimize. Because from my experience, at least, first of all, there was complete denial about some of the so-called horrific effects that the drug that I took could cause. Complete denial that it's a real thing even. And in other cases, also a complete minimization of any other risk or danger. And was that your experience as well when you were first started the course of medicating your son with these prescriptions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you want me to go into detail, I'd love to. So now we're at 2 neurologists. I see a movement neurologist. His first primary neurologist, I had done a little research, and I learned about Tegretol, and I saw like an obscure article saying that, oh, Tegretol could cause facial movements. And I brought it up to his neurologist. He said, oh, no, there's no way. He complete denial. I mean, it wasn't like the possibility. It was complete denial.
Complete denial that this even happens.
That the medication could cause any kind of, it was complete denial.
Will it be surprising to you if I will tell you, for example, that if you look at some of the textbooks that medical students read to finish medical school, for example, pharmacology is a very big and important subject in medicine. And I can assure you that the books that I have read, these are the so-called Bibles of pharmacology that every medical student uses, are a disgrace. I did not know so before I realized the truth of the matter, but all of these effects, all of these dangers are omitted very carefully, and medical students get a very distorted, skewed final version of the truth. And they're also indoctrinated to really believe everything they are being taught as if it's the word of God. After realizing that, for me, it's not surprising, but still, critical thinking, right? Use the internet, listen to other people. Maybe what you were taught is not exactly how things are. I'm sorry that you had to go through that as well.
Yeah, I think I would say to other people is trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, trust your gut and go with it. Don't sit back and just keep going to different doctors like I did. I waited too long, honestly. I left my son on the medication and it just caused further harm.
You saw progression in his symptoms.
Yeah, I believe it got to the point where he had full-blown serotonin syndrome. And when you reach that peak of serotonin syndrome, it can be deadly. It's not something I would wish on my worst enemy. What my son went through, I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
I can understand that sentiment. I guess for me, I would think the people who manufacture and lie about these drugs and what they actually do to people, I think they should sometimes get a dose of their own medicine so they understand the impact that they have. But besides that, I agree.
So we scheduled an appointment with a movement neurologist. It was a weird appointment because I remember the appointment vividly because a female doctor walked in and sitting down with my son, and literally the first words out of her mouth was, "It's not the medication."
The first word out of her mouth, it's not the medication.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember thinking, that's odd. Why would she come in and that's literally the first words out of her mouth? It just was so bizarre. The appointment just got more bizarre because it was like, and mind you, I've been taking my son to specialists for 23 years, so I've been to tons and tons of doctors. I just knew it was like, something's off. When you have a doctor walk right into the room and just vehemently deny that it's the medication, why are you walking into the room in pro pharma? I mean, why?
Protecting the pharmaceutical instead of protecting the patient.
Yeah. Why am I here if that's all you want to tell me? She tried to label it as a tic. That's what they tried to label it as, is, oh, well, he's developed tics. And, I did my research, and for someone to develop tics at age 19 is rare. It doesn't normally happen. So I didn't really buy that it was a tic. They wanted to say, oh, it's a tic, and here's clonidine.
Another drug.
Let's add in more pharma. And, I said, well, and at that point, I was already in the process of weaning him off the amitriptyline. I hadn't even done my research, but I was just going with my gut. I feel like the medication's making him toxic, so we need to start weaning him. And I was going really, really slow from what I've heard with these medications, is that the slower, the better.
Yeah, withdrawal symptoms, I've spoken to people, and we also had an interview on our channel with Sarah, who said that basically, the withdrawal can be so horrific that people just can't get off.
They quit. Yeah, they quit, and they don't microdosing. I didn't even know about that until I started researching, where they're diluting. I mean, it's the things that people have to do to get off of these drugs. I mean,
yeah, and some never manage to. Some never manage to. Some people, even after years, they're saying, like, they told me the withdrawal symptoms are so severe that I just might as well give in and stay medicated on this because I don't want to go through this. It's just hell getting off it. So no drugs. It's not the drugs. He's just developing tics. We don't want to even hear the possibility. A doctor should have this investigative curiosity of a medical professional. I want to know the truth of what's going on to my patient so I can resolve his suffering or her suffering. And if I am immediately blocking myself from pursuing an avenue because it does not fit the narrative or the paradigm that I believe in, that's a problem.
And then she proceeded to come over and finally examine him. Sometimes the doctors they're not even really examining patients anymore. It seems like medicine changed since my son was born. It's different.
You feel that it's changed over these 2 decades?
Mm-hmm. I feel like doctors used to care, and their hands are so tied that it's just different.
Yeah.
She finally came over and examined him, and she tried to say, well, maybe the movements, she put her hands on his shoulders and said, well, maybe the movements from his cerebral palsy. And I said, well, he's always been low tone on his upper half. You can see in the videos, it's tight. I said, I don't think it's from his cerebral palsy. It's tried to pin it on everything else but the medication.
Even though the medication is known, documented to cause movement disorders.
I mean, nobody ever mentioned it, ever. Nothing. They vehemently denied everything. If it wasn't for just the persistence that you just have to trust your gut and say, no, this is not right. This isn't it.
I mean, you're saying my son had cerebral palsy for 20 something years. It's not evolving now and he's getting this new problem all of a sudden, right? Especially when there's a confounding factor here, a drug that is known to cause issues of the sort. So what do you do from there after she tells you that?
I think I was like everybody else. I kept trusting the system. I look back and I think, why? I think as a parent, I was so afraid of going against, this is a major university in Seattle. I mean, I'm going against medical advice. I think it's fear-based, is that, I don't want to go against what the doctors are saying. I continued and I scheduled yet another neurologist appointment with a local neurologist with a different hospital closer to my home. And I go to that appointment, and this doctor comes in without saying 2 words to me and says, I agree with the other physicians. It's just a behavior.
It's just a behavior.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm like, am I in the twilight zone? Am I like, I'm just like, at that point, I wanted to get up and walk out of the office because I was just so frustrated that I think the reason partly too is when my son was younger and he had seizures, they didn't catch the seizures. The type of seizures that he had to be caught. He had they do 1 hour EEGs. Anyways, it didn't show up. So I pushed for a 24-hour EEG and it caught it. Otherwise, the doctor's like, oh, he's not having seizures. I've been down that road where the doctors say, oh, he doesn't have seizures. But
you would have not even gotten a seizure diagnosis in the first place.
Yep.
You were able, because again, and I want people to understand this. This is a really important point you're making here. Because I am getting sick of people, and specifically medical professionals, saying, don't listen to crazy mothers. And it sickens me. And it's also really dumb because you are the person who gave birth to that individual. You are with him all the time. Who knows them more than you, right? You have an intuitive sense to their well-being, to how they are. And you noticed this, right? This issue, and you pushed for that EEG when their doctor said, no, it's not, he doesn't have a seizure disorder. And your intuition, your ability to recognize these patterns in your son, obviously you would be better equipped at that than a doctor who's a complete stranger who doesn't know the kid at all, right? You were right. He was wrong, right? And so this is an important point to make. People trust your intuition. Go back a bit to normal reasoning and wisdom. Don't give your power away to some stranger just because he has a title of an MD in a white coat.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's critical. You just can't. That last neurologist that we saw, said, I agree with the other neurologist that it's just a behavior. And then he had the audacity to say that he would be willing to bet his career on it. I was like, okay, well, I'm done. I looked at him dead in the eye. I said, I've had neurologists tell me, that my son didn't have seizures, and he did have seizures. So I said, don't go down that. I wouldn't be willing to bet your career on this, Yeah. And, he had to eventually say, well, I don't know what it is. But it's just the audacity of some of these doctors, and it's so alarming.
The arrogance and the delusion that whatever bit of knowledge I have pipelined down to me from med school is the one and only truth, and anybody else who comes and provides some contradiction, maybe, I can't handle that. That's just how it is. It's the same story. I can say, reaffirm your position with me. After what happened to me, I went to 15 different doctors almost. I don't know how many doctors I went to. A lot of doctors, okay? And they every single one of them denied any association between the drug that I took and my symptoms. Even though when you look at the science and the mechanistic effects of this drug, there's nothing more obvious than a connection here. And yet, complete denial. I felt, as you said, like I'm in a twilight zone. And they told me, oh, it's in your head, or, And sometimes it doesn't matter if, for example, if you bring them evidence as well. So, for example, my eyes got really injured, and I have I imaged my glands in my eyes, and you see that they're all degenerating and atrophying, and they're not working. You see that there's damage there. Still, they would say that it's not the drug, even though it's a documented effect. It's just, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that you had to experience this, because it's maddening.
I mean, I showed videos to all of these neurologists. I video documented. Here's the kicker to me. This is why I knew that something was off, was because his pupils were so dilated. They were huge. They were like he was possessed. I mean, that's the only way I can explain it. Is they were the black part was just big and wide. And so it wasn't like he was just having the movements, but it was other symptoms. And so I even said that to a neurologist, and it was like, oh, he just is making himself upset. And it's like, can you make your pupils dilate?
He told you that he is making his own, he's controlling his own
Yeah, I mean, just
pupillary
the
reflex.
fathoming of what they tell patients, that the patients, they try to tell these patients, and since then I've learned how the doctors are telling it's psychosomatic and it's functional movement disorder, which is basically the hysterical, I mean, they try to say that it's make believe in your head. And so he wasn't just having the movements, he was having all of the symptoms of serotonin syndrome. I mean, I saw psychosis, I saw dilated pupils, I saw diarrhea, I mean, body movements, the eyes, his eyes will do the craziest things. And to this day, he still suffers from the eye dystonia. It's horrifying to watch.
Yeah.
It is horrifying.
I'm not a neurologist. And as I said, again, I'm a semester and a half away from finishing here and becoming an MD. But honestly, when I did my rotations in neurology and from what I've studied, this is nothing typical of anything that I've seen. No, we don't go into depth about dystonia in medical school as well. This does not look like regular seizure activity. There's more here at play that you can just pinpoint on a CP diagnosis or something of a sort. That's a cop-out. That's just really lazy thinking, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
if I saw that and you told me, the first question I would say is, what medications is he taking? That would be the first question I would ask you, because medications are known to cause these things. What got you to realize completely that it's these drugs? Did you talk to people online? Did you start listening to other people's testimonies? Like, what kind of led you down the awakening?
You get to a point where you don't have a choice anymore, I think. Either you're personally suffering or your family members personally suffering, where I felt compelled. I had to research day and night. I had to learn as much as about the medications. I had to learn from other people. I just dived in and learned as much as I could,
Yeah.
I felt like he was going to die, either from a stroke or from a heart attack. And another thing too is his blood pressure. None of the doctors ever cared that his pulse was 130. That's like his normal resting pulse. It's like, I'm just now learning about that. It's like, it was even 150 at one of the doctor's appointments. And it's like, like, that's from medication. You have to learn, you have to research.
There's an organization or a website called dystoniacanada.org. What I'm seeing, they're just talking a little bit about this. They're talking about drug-induced dystonia. What we're talking about is a documented phenomenon that if a doctor would just use himself, the internet or Google, they'd be able to see the connection. They haven't been directly taught this. When you do these searches on the net, you see these things, right? I mean, you started seeing that this is a phenomenon that is occurring to people.
I guess, putting two to two, the commercials don't say dystonia. They say movement disorder, and so I didn't even know what to look for. I had to post a video online of my son in an online forum, and I had to get feedback from other mothers and saying that's probably dystonia. That looks like tardive dystonia. And so it wasn't until I posted a video did I even learn of the word dystonia. I had no clue about that.
So I'm just reading here so people can see. A large number of drugs are capable of causing dystonia, and symptoms may include intermittent spasmodic or sustained involuntary contractions of the muscles in the neck, the trunk, the pelvis, the extremities. Yeah, they use some form of medications to try to, for example, like Benadryl, to try to treat it. And yeah, like you said, they call it tardive dystonia, which is a form of tardive dyskinesia. And it's definitely an effect of drugs. It's documented. It's something that is on the internet. Multiple websites talk about this. I'm just baffled that you go to your physicians, your neurologist, your son is experiencing these. So some of these dyskinesias, tell me if it's fitting, usually characterized by quick jerking movements, grimacing, tongue protrusions, puckering, eye blinkings, arm and legs may be involved. Does this seem reasonable? Something that you are, experiencing? Does this relate to what you guys are having to deal with?
Yeah, the tongue protrusion, the rapid eye movements. I mean, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are all classical symptoms and signs of this form of tardive dyskinesia that is happening as a result of exposure to these medications.
Mm.
For a doctor to tell you that it's completely unrelated is ludicrous.
Mm.
and asinine. In fact, I might say criminal.
I didn't learn dystonia from the physicians. I learned it from reaching out to other parents. I think my main concern is that there's so many autism families and their kids are so polydrugged and they have no clue what these medications. Just this morning, like I said, I was chatting with a mother online. Her son is in the emergency room banging his head, and the emergency room, I said, can you get a scan for encephalitis? She said, no, they refuse to because they're chalking the symptoms up to his autism. Another thing too, I've learned with the online forums that like somebody without special needs, it usually takes 10 years to get a dystonia diagnosis. That's insane in itself alone, that people are suffering. And by that time, it has progressed. But that's kind of the norm on these online. You'll see every now and then, or like I got my diagnosis in a year or two. But most of the time, it's around the give or take 10-year mark for people to get that dystonia diagnosis. It's not an easy diagnosis to get, that from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's not a diagnosis that perhaps drug-induced form. It's not a diagnosis that they like to give. Nobody, again, in the system, they don't like to tell you, well, your exposure to these compounds over the years did this. Medical professionals are reluctant to admit that the tools that they use, are actually causing harm. Because if they do that, where does that leave them, right? Kind of useless, right? Useless at the best, damaging, at the worst.
It seems like the younger mothers, like my generation, I'm an older mother of an older kid, but younger mothers that are coming up with the 2 and the 3-year-olds, they know that these medications are causing the side effects and they are turning to cannabis to treat their autistic kids, instead of medications, because they know.
So after realizing all these things, how are you guys doing today? And what alternative routes have you found to help manage some of these symptoms?
We were kind of in a emergency situation because, he was having these violent attacks, full body attacks 5 times a day, up to 20 minutes long. And it was like, I couldn't let him sit there and suffer. And, we had to get to the ER and they just like, go see a specialist, it's like, so you're kind of, you're at your own mercy. You have to think outside of the box. And I had a friend refer me to a group online. It's called Whole Plant Access for Autism. And it's from a mother that started out in California. Well, she moved to California to access cannabis for her older autistic son because, what happens with these kids is the system is so broken, they all end up in the emergency rooms, and the emergency rooms don't know what to do anymore. They just don't know. These kids are banging their heads, poking, it's this self-interest behavior is so bad, it's a broken system. So she was really one of the moms that spearheaded the movement for cannabis. And I think her group has like 24,000 people. And I was looking this morning and there's parents all over the world that are turning to cannabis and they're making their own oils and,
And they're finding symptomatic relief with using that?
Yeah. Yes.
Without the toxic load that comes along with taking these other prescriptions. That's, first of all, amazing to hear. That at least you have some avenue to pursue. So do you find that, you said it before, I'm just reinforcing this again, that these kids, obviously on the spectrum, they have a lot of issues, and it's much easier to just give a medication to each thing that they exhibit and just drug them out of their minds, right? It's a common thing, right? This is something that is happening all over.
Like up to 5 or 6 different hardcore antipsychotics. It's like, oh my goodness, that is just a storm waiting to happen at pharma.
It's unbelievable. And now with the actual rates of autism increasing all the time, and 1 out of 50, it depends on where you look, 1 out of 50 something, 1 out of 40 something are autistic. Your message is very important for a lot of people because a lot of people have autistic family members.
Yeah.
And so you will tell them that the medical approach, what would be your message to them right now, to parents, to families that have children on the spectrum? What should they do? When it comes to the medical system?
I guess for our family, that cannabis is working. He still has attacks, not as often. We're still seeing the eye movements, and we're still seeing, we're only about 6 months off of pharma. I think he developed akathisia too from coming off the medications. It was like a month after, but we started seeing really odd behaviors,
This constant restlessness and inability to stay still and
extreme fear. He won't leave the house now.
okay.
And he used to like to go all the time. So it's like now he won't even leave the house. He hasn't left the house for like the last 2 months. It's just really extreme fear. I think it's the EPS symptoms. They're all rolled into the side effects from the medications. And so
There's so many things like, there's first of all, you're on the medication for years, and then you stop and there's withdrawal. There's also symptoms that develop after chronic exposure to them. Part of them are the extrapyramidal symptoms, and it's a salad of all of this, the consequences of these concoctions.
you can tell like he grabs his head now, and you can tell it's like he has a headache. That's a common side effect from dystonia. And another thing too, I know it's dystonia because it's like I've asked questions, and I've like, to people online, I'm like, do you go in grocery stores? Does lights trigger your dystonia? And they're like, yeah, the fluorescent lightings in some of the bigger stores will make them have an attack, and
So you've talked to real people in the world. I mean, they don't have any other platform but the internet. So the people who criticize that avenue of getting information, I mean, I think it's like you're getting your information from all these so-called reputable sources, but they all have gross conflicts of interests to hide these dangers. What do these people on these forums that are suffering have, what interest do they have to lie to you? Not everybody is some crazy maniac going on detail about their issues. Because when you have a conversation with these people, right, 1, 2 more times, you see that they're, people that are just trying to figure out what's going on. And they sometimes can give you much more information than you could ever get from a doctor. That was my experience, at least. That was my experience. Because no doctor, I took a dermatological drug, right? No dermatologist could explain anything that's happening to me. And yet there are 10,000 people on Facebook groups right now, on support groups for people that were damaged by the drug. At least 10,000 people right now on Facebook suffering from the exact same issues I am. No doctor knows about this. So yeah, it's the disconnect from what is really happening in the real world is unreal.
Well, another thing too, when a physician puts down psychosomatic or functional movement disorder, that is putting the symptoms back onto the patient. And it relieves there's no paper trail to put it back, the symptoms to the medications. There's no paper trail. There's just not. So if people were to go and say, oh, well, look at the statistics, there's no statistics because they're diagnosing it as the person is basically making this up.
And if there is a statistic, it's completely manipulated and untrue. That's another thing. That's something I've learned to figure out by myself. Is that a lot of these researches, these articles that are being published, it's unbelievable how many of them are faulty, how many of them are just plain outright fabrication of reality. Mm-hmm. And the statistics that they list there are just not true, because they will even if you would meet a doctor, let's say, that would accept your theory on what is happening, they will tell you, okay, well, that's 1 in a million. But it's not 1 in a million.
No.
There are too many people to blow that statistic right out the window, right?
I think another thing too is that if it doesn't personally, from what I'm learning, if it doesn't personally happen to you or your family member, it's so easy just to turn a blind eye. It's so easy, and just to trust the system and just say it doesn't happen that often. It's no big deal. Firsthand, it's ruined your life. And my son used to be outgoing, and he loved people, and he loved to go places, and despite his disabilities, he still led a very, very active life. And we tried to make the best out of the situation with him.
Yeah.
Given the disadvantages, but and people loved him. I feel like, people are so quick to just dismiss special needs. They don't have a voice. They don't have an advocate to say, no, this is the medication, because most of them are nonverbal. And the parents, they have to go along with the doctors. There is fear that I think joining this other group with other mothers, I'm seeing that, if we all stand together and say, no, we're not taking the medication, there's a movement going on. You may not see it, but behind the scenes, there is other mothers that are turning to cannabis and using it instead of medications.
I have known some incredible benefits from cannabis. For example, I know that in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Forces, soldiers that have either undergone a traumatic experience or had a physical traumatic brain injury, they undergo treatment with high doses of different formulations of cannabis, because they've seen its effectiveness in, first of all, reducing PTSD symptoms. The earlier the exposure, the better. And also in helping improve the outcome of neurological injuries. And there's a lot of other interesting research when it comes to these plants. But unfortunately, there you go. This is something that you never learn about in medical school. You never learn a single thing about this. I can attest to that. Shannon, tell me, what would be your message to other people out there who have had their lives or the lives of their loved ones severely impacted by this medical establishment, by these toxic pharmaceuticals, and they're feeling, like their world is collapsing in on itself, they're alone, they're in the dark? What would your message to them to tell them to come forward and speak? What would you say to these people?
I think, like I told you earlier, I didn't want to do this interview. It's outside of my comfort zone. It's not something I wanted to do, but I felt compelled to do it because I didn't want other families to suffer and go through what our family has gone through and what my son has gone through. My husband asked me this morning, he was like, "Are you ready?" And I was like, I don't want to do this, but I don't want other people to suffer. I think if you're at a place in your life and you know that you've been harmed by your medications, if you shine a light on something, you bring it out of the darkness. And that's critical. When stuff stays in the darkness, it stays hidden. It needs to be exposed and it needs to be talked about so more people don't suffer. My advice to others is come forward, share your journey. You may not want to, but you may save somebody else's suffering.
Thank you. What would be your message to physicians or healthcare professionals that stumble upon this video and see this?
There's good physicians and there's bad physicians from my experience, and if you can willingly know that your patient is suffering and write it down, and you're part of the problem.
Definitely. Yeah, if you're not aware of the harm that you can potentially cause other people and you're actively doing it, you are part of the problem, because you're doing exactly the opposite of what you signed up to do, which is to help and not cause more suffering.
Yeah.
Shannon, I wanted to thank you so much for having the courage to come up here and speak your truth. Tell us what happened, the ordeal that your family has had to undergo. And I want to wish you guys the very best. And I really hope that you manage to overcome this and come stronger as a family, and that your son will know better days.
I hope we all, you included, I hope everybody out there that's been ever injured by any type of pharmaceutical just continue to hold on to hope. It's going to be brighter days ahead. I see the darkest of days with my son, and I get pulled in, I get sucked under into the darkness, and it's like we all just got to keep holding on.
Thank you, Shannon, so much for coming here.